Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and today I have my May reading wrap-up for you. And I am just so excited because I'm finally out of my reading slump. I'm back in the reading game and it just feels amazing. Because in February, March and April I was kind of a bit in a reading slump, especially in April, and it's not a nice feeling. I read a total of 7 books, which isn't actually that much more than in the last months, but this month only one of them was a reread. So I read 6 books for the first time and 1 book that I have read for the 100th time. But most of the books actually are quite big. Let me show you the books that I have read. The first book that I read this month is actually an ebook, and that is Fallen Angel by David Lamour. I hope I pronounced that name correctly. And I was sent an e-copy of this book for an honest review. It's a kind of paranormal romance urban fantasy book with quite a few biblical motifs, if the name isn't an indication. I have a full spoiler-free review on this book, which I'll leave in the description box down below. And I actually quite enjoyed this book. I was pleasantly surprised. The next book I read this month was The Trials of Apollo, The Hidden Oracle by Rick Riordan. This is the first book in his new series, trilogy. I don't know how many books there will be. And this book follows Apollo as he's turned into a mortal by his father Zeus after the stuff that happened in Heroes of Olympus. I really liked Percy Jackson and I really liked Heroes of Olympus, but ever since then I just seem to be disappointed by Rick Riordan's books. I didn't like Magnus Chase. I liked this book a bit more, but only because just the legends, the mythology was better. I knew a few of the stories from like mythology perspective, but not well enough that I knew beforehand what was going to happen. Otherwise, I didn't really like Apollo. I guessed the twist at the end, and the only reason why I am going to continue with the series is 2 very special characters that appear at the end of the book, and I'm not going to spoil you who those people are for those of you who have not read this book. Then I took some time for my reread, and that reread is The House of Gaian by Anne Bishop, which is the 3rd book in the Tira Lane trilogy. I reread the 2nd book in this trilogy last month, and so I had to reread the 3rd book this month, and it was just so good again, and I cried again, and it was just so heartbreaking and heartwarming at the same time. And now I have a little story for you. At the end of last month I was at the bookstore with my mother, because that's just what we do if we have some free time. She is one of the people who made me read as much as I do now. And we were in the upper section of the bookstore where all the English books are, the children's books and the fantasy books. And I was browsing the fairy tale section because I always go there whenever I'm at the bookstore, because I want to see if they have some cool new illustrated edition. I don't know if you know that about me, but I am obsessed with the Grimm's fairy tales. I have about 5 editions, I think. And so I was browsing in the fairy tale section, and my mom was browsing in the fantasy section for some reason. She does read some fantasy, but she mostly only reads crime novels, but she said that the crime novel she was reading at the moment was kind of boring, so she wanted something different. And so she went into the fantasy section. Well, after some time she came over to me and she held up this book and said, "Do you know this book?" And I said, "Well, yes, I have heard of it on BookTube. Most people say that it's really good. I'm really interested in reading it, and they never have the English copy of this book at the bookstore. I have looked for it multiple times already." And she was like, okay, so, but you wouldn't want to read this book in German, right? And I was like, well, I don't mind. It's been some time since I read a book in German. If you want to read it as well, of course we can buy it in German. Also, it's cheaper for me since you're going to buy the book and I don't have to buy it. So we bought the book, and on our way home I asked her, "Why did you even pick that book up?" And she said, "Well, I like the cover, and the cover is really beautiful. I'm going to show a picture of what is on the cover right here. I just had to laugh at that, because even though a cover sometimes might be something that draws me towards a book, I will never buy a book without reading the summary, and that's basically what she did. That day I slept at her place, and in the evening I thought, okay, I'll start reading the book. I don't have any books to read right now. So I picked the book up and I turned it around and read the summary for the first time, because I hadn't read it until that point, because I basically knew what everything was about. But I read the summary and I thought that it sounded kind of strange. I thought to myself, this doesn't sound like the summary for a first book. And then I looked at the front and nothing was standing there. There was just like the title and the title of the series, and then I looked to the side and it said book 6. I was like, Mom, come on! Why didn't you look which book it is? And she was like, oh, what? Why? What? What happened? And so I couldn't read the book, but the very next week I went and picked up the first book in the series. And that series is The Codex Alera by Jim Butcher. And so this month I read the first book, which is The Furies of Calderon. I really loved it. This is a high fantasy series and it's based on ancient Rome and Pokemon, because apparently Jim Butcher had a bet with someone if he were able to write a high fantasy series based off of that. But it's really awesome, and it's kind of set in this world where everyone can command those kind of elementals called Furies, and so it's really great. And then, because I very rarely buy more than the first book if I don't know a series, I had to go back again and buy the second book, which is Academ's Fury. And after that I picked up A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J Maas, which is the second book in the A Court of Thorns and Roses series. And I wasn't sure if I was going to give this another chance, because I was kind of iffy about the first book, but I decided to give it a second chance, and I am so glad I did. And I have a whole review that has a spoiler-free part as well as a spoilery discussion. And the last book I read this month was Assassin's Apprentice, which is the first book in the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb. Although I guess it's a stretch to say I read it last month. Well, it's not a stretch, but I finished the last 40 pages or so on the first, so yesterday. But who cares? And I decided to pick this up because I decided to join the Hob-along read-along, created and hosted by Sam, formerly known as Novels and Nonsense, now Sam's Nonsense. I wasn't blown away by this book, but I still really enjoyed it. This is just the first book in this series, the first book in this world, I think. And so there's just a lot of setup and world building, and so of course it's a high fantasy series. I'm very rarely blown away by the first book in a high fantasy series, because there just has to be so much world building and setup. But I am definitely glad to continue on with this series this month, and then to read the rest of her books until December, I think. And if you want to join the read along as well, I will leave the link to the Goodreads group in the description box down below. So this is it. This is the books that I read this month. I am really quite proud of myself for coming out of this reading slump and reading so many big fantasy books. I hope you enjoyed this video. Tell me what books you read this month, or if you have read any of the books that I have read, and I hope I'll see you guys soon. Kiss kiss!